turnout. Nice to see so many of you again. I hope you've defrosted, and it's nice and cozy. And I am going to pass this wonderful opportunity over to our new curator of modern and contemporary art. Many of you have met her, and if you haven't, you'll meet her this evening. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ksenia Gerstein, our new curator here at the Ulrich, who will introduce Randy.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming out. As Leslie said, this is a great turnout, and it is a real honor and pleasure for me to be up here tonight. Pardon me. I don't normally sound like this, I apologize. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Randy Regier tonight, who will share with us the remarkable stories and thoughts behind the creation of his sculpture, The Celestial Mechanic. This is the part where I'm going to give you Randy's bio again. It's going to be a day where you just keep hearing your story and you're like, did that really happen to me? So he's a sculptor and installation artist with deep family roots in Kansas, who currently lives and works in Kansas City. He received his BFA from Kansas State University and MFA from Maine College of Art. He's represented by Jim Kempner Fine Arts in New York, and his work has been shown and extensively collected here in Kansas, as well as nationally at venues that include the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the DeCorver Sculpture Park and Museum, the Renaissance Society in Chicago, and Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit. So in my capacity as the curator here at the Ulrich, I've known Randy for only a very short period of time. But in that brief time, I've been really, really impressed with two things. One is the thoughtfulness with which he approaches his art making and the depth of research that goes into his work. I was looking on his artist's website, and I think it says a lot about Randy as an artist that there is a whole separate page of books on a really broad range of topics that have influenced him. That it tends to be unusual for artists' websites to kind of very consciously articulate that. And it's very illuminating, I think, of his creative process, as we'll see tonight. He's also remarkable for his commitment and sort of dogged perseverance, I think, for building a creative practice, for iterating on ideas until they find the right form, and then for going out there in the world and just collecting what sounds like enormous quantities of materials to, to make those ideas come to life. And so as art viewers, we're the beneficiaries of both that thoughtfulness and that doggedness. And because his interests are so wide-ranging, his work, at least for me, The Celestial Mechanic especially, has this wonderful quality that it sparks my imagination and it makes me wonder about things and think up lots of stories, and I mean that was clearly the intent from the beginning about what this mysterious object might be. And then what's even more wonderful is that the stories never fully exhaust that sense of mystery and wonder. There's always a little bit left over, and then when Randy talks about the work, you get even more sense of mystery and wonder. And so with that said, I hope you will help me in welcoming Randy to come up here and lift some of the veil on the creation of Celestial Mechanic and continue that virtuous cycle of mystery and wonder. Yeah, I think I'll
Thank you, Ksenia, Leslie, everyone. I'd like to start by going through my bio again. I went to Kansas State. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. Yes, thank you so much. I think I got the emotional thing out of the way earlier. Yeah, stop it. Let's just go. So Saul Steinberg, one of my favorite artists. Cartooning was really my first artistic love. I did that for going on 20 years, had some success with that. But there came a point where I realized when the sculptural work sort of started to become the thing that I was doing at Kansas State was being recognized, one, that I couldn't do both, and two, that the cartooning and many of the cartoons that I'd done over the years, I look back to them, were sketches of things that I wished were in the world. So I can see now that the cartooning was a path to the work I do now. But that being said, my first loves were like the New Yorker cartoon anthologies that I would check out from the library when I was a kid, going back into the 20s. And I would take those home and devour them, and fell in love with line and word. So Saul Steinberg is a very important artist to me. Even more so when I discovered this quote in a 1957 Selden Rodman interview with him, where I'm a writer who can't write. And I just found this a week ago. But I love writing stories, but I don't have the patience to write the written word, only to read it. The written word, when I write a story, is a sketch for the thing I want to be. So I love this quote from Steinberg. I'm a writer who uses objects to write, in many cases. Ruth, thank you. Ruth and I met through this image a few years ago. Peter Iredale, south of Astoria, Oregon, on the Pacific coast. I first saw this about 1971-ish. My parents, we moved from Newton, Kansas to Oregon. And at some point we went to the Oregon coast, and when the tide's out, you can approach the remains of this 1906, I think it is, shipwreck of the Peter Iredale. And when the tide's in, you can't. And I would have been 6 or 7 years old, and I was so infatuated with this thing, completely convinced, as a child can be, that there had to be something in this shipwreck that someone else hadn't found yet. I mean, for all I don't recall if the thing was hauling bales of hay, but not in my mind. There had to be a sword somewhere in that sand. So a couple years ago, when Vicki and I inadvertently moved back to Oregon for a bit, after our Wichita time, we went back to this Peter Iredale. And I am very happy to say, of all the things in your childhood that you wish to go back to and you can't, because they either weren't what you remember them to be or they're gone, this isn't one of them. I had the same... Two images. What the hell? I'm good now. I'm just acting. This is what I like. I mean, these are the things I like. Not the red one, the other one. Not the red Ferrari or the blue Bizzarini. Yeah, they're fine. But I want the one on the left. I want the ship undersea. I want the airplane on the bottom of the ocean in the truck lagoon. Why? They have stories. The red car doesn't really have a very compelling story. The other one has a magnificent story, maybe. And I want to know what it is, or I want to be the one that tells it. There's also a lot of other things going on with the two lower images. Subterranean, the subconscious, dream states. An object of desire in a landscape that will kill you if you try to swim down to it. That tension, that drove a lot of the New Penny work. Back to stories, certainly to books. Thank you, Ksenia, for mentioning the reading list. That's probably the most revealing part of my entire website, as eclectic as it is about me. If it reveals anything, I don't know what that is, but reading and books, and reading any books, and picture books. But the book on the left, Singing Cave, I had read that book as a kid, probably 11, 12 years old. This wonderful story of this kid that's not supposed to go into a cave because it floods every time the tide's in. So what does he do? He goes into the cave when the tide's out. Tide comes in, flees back into the cave, finds a Viking ship, comes out, can't talk about it because he wasn't supposed to be in the cave. Pretty good story, right? And, I'm 11, like, man, if I could just get back to the Oregon coast, I'm going to start going into the caves, because clearly that's where the Viking ships are instead of the Peter Iredale. There's a great story behind that book. If I tell it, I think I won't get through everything, so maybe later, if there's time, I'll tell the backstory to how I recovered that book. Because it was lost to me for a long time, couldn't recall the title, couldn't recall the author, and then found it after a mechanical breakdown while I was wasting time. I just told it, wasting time in a bookstore in Columbia, Missouri. So paid $3,000 transmission repair, and I got this book out of it, and it was worth every penny. The book on the right, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the John Carter Warlord of Mars series, we house sat for a couple when I was about 12 years old, and these books were all in the house with the Frazetta covers, which if you know the Frazetta covers with the women, that would have been reason enough for me to want to read the books. Sorry. They're voluptuous, to say the least. That being said, they were just wildly imaginative. And the idea of these ships with lasers floating on Mars, just rich imagery. This, I think, is one of all the books that I've bought for covers, this is it. I got this in a dusty bookshelf in Manhattan, Kansas, around 1998 or 9. And just the illustration of the book illuminating the face of the reader. And then look at that humble little title, The Book of Earth. And it's prose poetry, it's incredible. It's like, you read this book, it's like being in a deep dream in old time. And it's a prose poetry about the origins of Earth. And it's just chillingly beautiful to read. A little, not all of it, but it's really important. And this photograph just happens to be contrived with these hands I had built from a previous attempt at a celestial mechanic piece that didn't work out. So that's what they're about. Which brings us to the point of being here tonight, which is the origin story of the celestial mechanic is very literally the story of the Fallen Spaceman by Lee Harding. So on the right here, this is a 1971, June 71 Worlds of If, as you can see, Fallen Spaceman by Lee Harding, which recounts, it's a short story, it's available online, it's a PDF, the Ulrich can feed it to you, I can send you the link or the PDF, and it purports to tell this story of this character named the protagonist Mataro. At the beginning of the story, he's working on a spaceship doing some sort of service work in deep space on the outside of the ship, and the ship just takes off, leaves him in its turbulence, just spinning. It's analogous to someone falling off of a huge freighter in turbulent seas. By the time they figure out he fell off, nobody's coming back. You don't know where this person is. So it's that set in space. The suit has a certain amount of oxygen and battery power and smarts, and the suit communicates to Mataro that it can get him to the closest planet and that it calculates he could survive there. So you're with him, he's falling towards this planet, you don't know what planet it is, and about 200 feet from the planet's surface, the suit runs out of battery power, and he just slams through the tree branches and into the brush, and the story changes to a person who's fishing, and he hears this crash, and he comes tentatively through the brush and hears this steaming, smoking spacesuit. So, looks around, sees a face mask, sees that there's a human, kind of alive, goes to the village elders, so this gives you kind of a sense. We're probably on Earth, but we're not in 1971. They have a meeting because they're not unaware that this could happen. They're the elders and they have access to the ancient books of wisdom. They consult the books and find out, yeah, this was prescribed, that this could happen. We knew this might happen. So to get the village blacksmith, they go to the suit. It takes them a great deal of time to open the suit because they've never seen anything like it. They get the suit open. They take the character, Mataro, back to a room. They try to water in a beautiful room with sunlight. And he goes into this sort of fever dream. You're back with him. And you realize my interpretation of this story, subject to contradiction if someone else sees it otherwise, is that he dreams of his ancient past. And in his generations past, he would have been from this planet and lived here. But he's so many generations removed, never having been here, he can no longer live here and he dies. There's no lasers, there's no swords, there's no anger, there's no walls built, there's no fear, there's concern for his well-being. And when he dies, the villagers bury him at the top of a hill, they plant a tree at his head and his feet, they instruct the children to care for the grave. The suit's never mentioned again. See where I'm going with this? Where's the suit? What happened to the suit? Really good story, but I want to find the suit. Well, it's in Wichita, clearly. Right? So, here we go. So, Ben Shahn, how many of you seen The Blind Botanist at the Wichita Art Museum, the Ben Shahn piece? Yeah, amazing piece, right? So, Ben Shahn, big fan of Ben Shahn. This thing here, this human wish to formulate ideas, to recreate them into entities so that meanings will not depart fitfully as they do from the mind, so that thinking and belief and attitudes may endure as actual things. If that's not a claim for the arts, I don't know what is. So that thinking and belief and attitudes may endure as actual things. Not that we agree on these things, right? But that they endure, and we can, generations from now, can look at them and say, who were these people? What were they thinking about? What did they believe in? And that these enduring things will be maybe the only conversations that survive. And by the way, back to the Kansas origins of all this work, Shape of Content, I bought at 8th Day Books on Douglas. They have more copies. Buy them out. So, what was the celestial mechanic? What was the fallen spaceman? In my case, she becomes feminine in my world. What was she wearing? Back to research, that suit on the left is the RX-2 by Litton Industries around 1961, I believe, or late 50s. And I just love the fact that the early space suits were called hard suits, and they were apparently mapped upon suits of armor, because the assumption being that space would be so hostile and full of particulates and meteorites that you had to be protected and thus armored. And the suit on the left is just a gorgeous thing in its own right, as is the suit on the right. I love the juxtaposition of these two things. But it's a pretty tall order to try to make something that elegant, because I can add things together well. I have certain skill sets, but I currently work in a body shop in Kansas City next to a man who's 10 years my senior, who can take a flat sheet of metal and make an articulate form from it. I honestly can't do that. I'm not that skilled. So my avenue, I have to rely on the ingenuity of others. That would be dishware, Chromex, pots and pans. Those are very beautiful forms. And if you seek those forms rigorously, everything is out there to do this, but where is it? Where am I at? Back up. One more. So, and then so in the course of the research, I'd stumble into theories and conspiracies and what have you, lost cosmonaut theory, ancient astronaut theory, which a lot of ancient astronaut theory is linked to this image on the left because people they see the image and they don't bother to research it. That's done 1992, the Cathedral at Salamanca, Spain, by an artisan who was commissioned to add a sculpture to the cathedral that represented the 20th century, and he said space flight. So that's completely intentional, it's known, but if you take that image out of context and you're conspiracy-minded, you can really run with that thing, right? The two on the right, I haven't found as much information as I'd like in time for this talk, but those are actual antiquities. And to the extent that I know, still open to interpretation. The one on the left, we have a pretty good idea what was going on there. But in 100 years, who knows? First human to walk in space was Alexei Leonov, cosmonaut, in 1965, March 19th of 1965, which is a fantastic thing, this human in space. Even more fantastic was that he had a soft suit He was out for about 10 minutes, first ever human to be floating in space, looking at the Earth. And he decided, I need to get back. He knew, I have to get back in. I'm running out of oxygen and what have you. And his suit had sort of frozen up and inflated. And he realized, I'm not getting back in. He was just like this. Well, first person to walk in space, how else would you know? He saved his life by letting the oxygen out of his suit, deflating his suit, so he could get back in. And he made it. He survived. Incredible story. But while he was orbiting Earth, he had pencils tied to string, banded to his forearm with a rubber band, and he drew this first ever piece of art in space of a sunrise. So that's the first ever piece of artwork done in outer space with pencils on paper of a sunrise, and that's pretty fantastic. And I just love it. Alan Bean, the American astronaut who became an artist. This is an earlier painting of his, which I think is just an exceptional painting. His later work is very much lunar landing, lunar modules, astronauts, very, kind of like Alex Katz. It doesn't vary a lot, but it's really likable. This work is 1975 by Alan Bean. And so I'm just connecting the dots here about space and art and space and otherworldly aesthetics. And I couldn't leave Alan Bean out of the conversation. On a more serious note, so I've had a lot of experience with found objects. Starting in about 1966, my dad trained me, because I didn't do this. But clearly, you want to instruct your children. You want to give them skills that they can survive with. How many of you, most of you actually know what those things are in my nose, don't you? Yeah, they don't make those anymore. Yeah, flash bulbs. So a few years later, I'm still using those same skill sets I picked up about 1967. These two things that look likely to be a torso for me are for doing front wheel alignment. If you turn them facing each other and face them at the two front wheels of an automobile, they're Alamite electronic wheel balancers. Found them in Salina, Kansas at Cleo Westling's farm, junkyard, art supply, There's Cleo Westling's place. Yeah. Now he's just recently deceased a couple years ago, but he earned it. He had fought in the Pacific Theater in World War II and had acres. Since about 1947, he had collected scrap metal. And a lot of my work started, this is where I got my materials. And despite how that may or may not look to you, he was very organized. He knew, you could ask him where a certain thing was, and he could tell you it would be by the root of a tree, by a certain vehicle on the north side. And it would be there underneath something else. He knew where every freaking thing on that property was, and he knew what it was worth. So this is no longer accessible since he's passed, so what is past is past. The yard, which photograph I took of the yard, including how I feel about it. This is how I see the yard. I'm not sure how you see it. So, it's good to have these places that really are looking out for you. And this is where I got the title. And I got this from that recycling center that we used to take all our recycling here in Wichita, South Wichita, near the tracks, where you go in and you take your stuff and spread it. And they kept all the books in the back, and you could just have books. Like, really? You can have books? Okay, I'll have books. And I found this there, and I thought, man, that's a title for something. And the only downside to this, the only defect in this book, as a friend pointed out, is it's too bad that the guy's initials weren't I.M. But you can't have it all. So that would be nice. Celestial Mechanics by I.M. Smart. But maybe that's redundant. But I dropped that S, I'm like, man, that's as good a title as there's ever been for a piece of work. What's the work? I hadn't started Our Celestial Mechanic yet, but I had. Again, more divine intervention. It's from Dirk Willems, from Martyr's Mirror up there in the sky, leading me to the Mennonite World Review in Newton, Kansas, where the Tim Huber at the Mennonite World Review offered me a 1951 Kelvinator refrigerator, partly because it quit working, so it had been a refrigerator. Now it was an ex-refrigerator. But again, I've got these friends and colleagues that they see things the way I see things, and sometimes they say, Randy might find value in this, which is way better than sending it to a landfill. And I went and picked it up, and it's this beautiful refrigerator on the right, and there's the original ad for it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but very quickly it presented itself as what I was going to do with it. Now, fun fact, so Kelvinator is made by Nash, which became American Motors, right? Nash Automobile. So this was made on this Kelvinator refrigerator. When I took the panel off, it said Nash Motor Company, what's it called? They were Cadillac, it's Wisconsin, Kenosha Cadillac, is that what they're called? The Ramblers? Yeah, but at any rate, Nash, wherever Nash was located, at any rate, they also made the Nash automobile. The 1950 Nash advertisement for the Ambassador said, scientific evidence from wind tunnel tests at the University of Wichita result in 20.7% less drag. So I'm just making a claim here that we're not even 6 degrees of separation. Yeah, that refrigerator had almost been here in the form of a Nash automobile. Interestingly enough, it's the same sheet metal and everything. They make a refrigerator that they make a car out of in the same company. Yeah, it's a fun little diversion. And I imagine the wind tunnel's still here, probably NIAR, anybody know? So here's the refrigerator, and at this point now we're really fully vested in building the Celestial Mechanic. These other objects are all starting to play their role, and so here we go, and get into the good stuff. And but it was important to me. Plausibility came up. Speaking before, I've been speaking for hours. Before this, we were talking about plausibility in a group. And Thomas Wolfe, the author, the American author, recently deceased, I heard an interview with him, and he said that fiction is much more difficult than truth because fiction has to be plausible. Given the recent state of events, I would agree. You can't make a lot up of what, I mean, this, oof. So, but the bar is high. And so, in regards to plausibility, I built this suit and I wore every component of it. Everything that I built, torso, helmet, arms, legs, individually, I wore them so that I could plausibly believe that the suit was a wearable suit. Also, Kylie Brown was part of that. I don't think she's here. But essentially, the suit, we had a good crit one time in my studio, and essentially I designed the suit to be Kylie's size. So I think of it in some respects as being a suit for someone like Kylie. Around that point, the suit became a suit for a female astronaut. So moving forward, I mentioned it out there, it's a she. She's a she. The helmet, wanted to do the glass bowl thing, but that's really Buck Rogers, and I'm not real into Buck Rogers. I like more plausibility than that. And so, after the mid-'60s, space travel became much more plausible by necessity because we started to understand what was actually at stake. And a big glass bowl really wasn't ideal. But Heston, Kansas, there's a little antique store in Heston, and I found that Seabird 200 desktop jukebox that they used to have at individual tables at diners, right? And I thought, man, I'm buying that, and I sure hope I can get my head in it. And I was so happy. That is such a great helmet. I mean, it's just so. And there was like 80 cents worth of solid silver dimes that had fallen through. So bonus points. So here we go, starting to really happen for me now. At this point, I'm thinking, I had a false sense of confidence at this point that this thing was really gonna work. But what I did was I really started with the gravy. This is the easiest part, I'll tell you what. Aesthetically, I just started with the play part. Oh, a helmet. Done. Wrong. Turns out, if you want to make a plausible hard suit, it's got to do this. This is incredibly complicated stuff. You know, finding these photographs was great, but then I went, oh, I'm out of my league. Completely out of my league. I mean, just think of the joints and the integrity that these things have to do this. And at this point, I think I had already sold the piece to the Ulrich. I'm like, oh, crap. I can't not do this, right? I'm in too deep. And I was like, it was a good feeling because you want that challenge. But I was like, the hardest part of that whole suit was the pelvis, making that plausible. Thankfully, I'm in Wichita where you can get aircraft nose cones blowing down the street. Practically. And so after about 3 cuts, I got one to work out. And I spare you all the photograph I have wearing that. And then, you know, the legs. But this was a huge, for me, technically, I like, this was a kind of a deal breaker for me to get this done. And but she's really starting to come around now. At this point, so the Kelvinator is it's cut way down. The Seaberg thing, we'll get to the other parts here in a minute. Chromex by Alcoa Aluminum. And I just really, I mean, big debt of gratitude to Alcoa and antique stores in Kansas, because Vicki, bless her heart, we hunted this stuff. I didn't want to get it on eBay. I could have ordered it up on eBay, hit PayPal, and had it all dropped off. But I said, no, I want to find it in Kansas. Well, it's not the hardest thing to find vintage kitchen containers in the Midwest. Frankly, it's not the hardest thing to find them anywhere. They're like just the most common currency for a generation, kitchenware. So thankfully, this stuff is still in relative abundance. Now, finding 2 of what you want, that's the kicker, because when you do a human form, with the exception of the torso and the helmet, there's 2 of everything. And I would find this amazing thing, and then we would drive for a day across Kansas and not find another one of the same thing. But ultimately, we did. And I did get some pieces off of eBay. I just had to at some point. The other thing, I don't know how many of you have done figure drawing as a student or just because, or sculpting, but when you do the human form, hands and feet are very complicated for most people. There are people who, no problem, but even in the masterpiece paintings, there were master painters who would do the portrait and have an assistant who could do hands come in and knock the hand out, because some people can do hands and most of us can't. Because again, if you don't get the hands right, people go, neat piece, the hands aren't right. Something wrong with the hands. Or you could just do this, you know? Screw, no, he had it in his coat. Well, I didn't have that luxury. So what bailed me out was this image I found in a young adult space book, tentacle gloves. I'm like, woo! I don't have to do hands because the book says I don't. So, you know, the hand goes to the end of the sleeve, and then there's a mechanical glove. Well, that was great. The feet are kind of hard, but boots weren't the hardest part. Lampshades, and yeah, I think those were all made from those conical lampshades, reformed, as I recall. More lampshades, Chromex, lampshades, cake molds. The spheres are cake molds, Wilton cake molds for making sports ball themed cakes. all right? You put the batter in the sphere, you put a ring around it, you set it on the whole thing, you bake it, you have a round cake. All you bakers, thank me for that. That's a little tip I'm throwing out to you, because I'm such a baker. And then the orange and silver, I wanted some color, and those of you that know my X1 piece at the Emprise Bank, that's orange and silver because in 1967 my dad painted his motorcycle helmet orange and silver, and that's when I knew that those two colors were the coolest colors ever. And that's not even open to discussion. But no, they're good sci-fi. It's a good sci-fi palette. Orange and silver shows up a lot in sci-fi. Red and yellow, orange and silver, certain kinds of blues. It's everything. It all matters. It all matters. Here she's really coming into her own. These beautiful clamps on her wrist. If you go back and you didn't notice them before, and you look in the installation, there's these wing nuts on her tentacle gloves that have these gorgeous rocket-themed wing nuts. They look incredibly aerodynamic and intentional. And they show, because there's no way I wasn't going to let those show. They're from a dairy, naturally. Because if you have a dairy, things should be aerodynamic, right? Never mind. I don't know why a dairy has aerodynamic wing nuts that look like rockets, but they do, and all the better. The dove, I would have liked to have found a dove motif in Kansas on my routes. I didn't. That's an eBay purchase. There's two of them on her. That's a specific homage to growing up in the Mennonite community, the value of peace. And it's very difficult to make an alien science fiction arrival piece that doesn't direct people's attentions to invasion, to threat, to fear, to fright. Very difficult. And given that I don't have any say in the piece from here on out, tonight's it. For people who encounter that piece going forward, their interpretation is whatever they wish it to be. I wanted to instill something in the piece that held that thing. And a dove is a representative of peace in our culture, in some culture. And so by doing that, I was able to build that into the work in a way that felt organic, germane to the piece, not overly didactic, I hope, and completely necessary. And then, of course, in the Fallen Spaceman story, it's a very peaceable story. So it's germane to the story as well. That's the reason for the dove. So unless there's a great upheaval or some sort of major event that requires the piece be disassembled and taken out of the ground, which I hope doesn't happen in my lifetime. I'd like to see it stay and become part of the landscape as it will. This won't be seen again. This is the back and the back of her head. Film projector. 8mm film projector is the back of her helmet. Snapped. Get this. The 8mm, half of an 8mm film projector, right? There's the half that you take off, that you load the film, and then the half that holds the lens and all that, or however it works. That casing that unscrews snapped into the back of that Seabird 200 jukebox. It literally snapped in. It's because of that. Yeah, I don't know. So here she is, not done, but ready to be interred, if you will, in Towanda, Kansas at Mike Miller's place. So we're getting ready to leave Wichita. The Ulrich has bought the piece. It's going to be a while. At that time, I think it was going to be a year before we reinterred her on the campus. But the patina, I wanted her to arrive on campus as if she's been here a long time. Well, the way to do that is get out of the way and let Mother Nature do the work. So we buried her in a shallow, not a grave pit, on Mike Miller's place, and just walked away. Moved to Oregon and whatever, and didn't see her again until Mike sent me a photograph, I don't know, a year later, spring, and some of the earth had washed off and she was sort of coming up. It was gorgeous. really gorgeous. Which brings me to, now this is we're concluding my talk. What comes, what do I want from all this, other than what I already have, which is more than anyone should ask for? What could I imagine I could want next? This is an image I found on the web by Daryl Leem. Oh, forget the third surname. I'm sorry, I had his name and I lost it. It's the only image I found of his that's anything like this. But if you've ever been to Kansas, you can. Anybody? Okay, all right. I need to get this talk in Kansas. At any rate, this image just compels me to no end. Like, if this existed, I would just be there all the time. Just looking at it and wondering. And I wanted to go to that place. And this 1880 French deep sea diver suit on the left is one of the most remarkable things I've never seen in person, but would travel the world to be next to that. That is an astounding thing. And look at that patina. That is, I'm guessing it's brass or bronze, copper maybe, I don't know. It's incredible. 1880. The first person who went down in that was either very trustworthy or something. And then, of course, I don't have to describe the piece on the right, but I think differently about cicadas now, and that shell, what is that thing, and what was in that thing? Where did it go? You can see the equation I'm starting to make to our mechanic. It's an empty shell. Ötzi, the 5,000-year-old Tyrolean Alps guy, murder victim. This was found in 1992 by two German hikers in the Tyrolean Alps as the snow melt, and they thought it was a relatively recent event. They called the police. We've got a problem here. The police said, well, it's a pretty old body. Archaeologist came in, he's like 5,300 years old. He was shot in the back with an arrow. He was murdered some hundred odd years ago. Meanwhile, in Kearney, Missouri, Gary Staub on the left was commissioned to make the duplicate of him that can be shown at museums, because he's real human remains. Look up Ötzi, O-T-Z-I, umlaut over the O. You'll find out incredible amount of information, recreations of him fleshed out. And they even could tell what he ate. The food was still in his belly. And the broken off arrow in his back. And he wronged somebody 4 years ago in 4 days and 26 minutes. And anyway, Gary Staub, Vicki and I visited his studio in Kearney, Missouri, and we didn't see this isn't a photo I took, but he makes these identical reproductions of Ötzi that now can be disseminated to different museums. And Gary Staub gave me this book, Lauren Isley's The Immense Journey. And if you haven't read this book, I'm sorry. Read this book, or read the first chapter. But this book's connection to celestial mechanic is as intimate as the Fallen Spaceman, but far broader implications. Enough said about that. And the guy, what a writer. I don't mean read the book for the content. I mean read the book because the guy could write like if Wendell Berry were an archaeologist, like that. Questions come up with me always. What is this thing with the past? Why do you care? Why the past? Why the past? Why antiquity? Why these backward glances? And this top screen grab is a conversation I was having with Tim Johnson, a very dear friend of mine in Abilene, and we were speaking, and I read Richard Rohr's daily writings. I follow Richard Rohr's writings, and he had recently wrote that we value the past and antiquity because we equate it with the eternal, which we have trouble doing with the present. And I think that's probably my fascination with the past, is it grounds me, and I'm less inclined to panic, to fear, and to being misanthropic about the present. I don't value the present like I should. I don't value the artifacts of the present because they don't have that patina yet. They haven't proven themselves. I don't value the homogeneity, if that's even a word, that all the cars look like the potatoes that have been slightly sculpted. But I appreciate that a lot of modernity is working for people in ways the past hasn't. But there's something about the past that has intense and immense and enduring value. What is it? And that's where Svetlana Boym comes in for me, as she talks about restorative nostalgia, which is the nostalgia that's more inclined towards people who want to go back to when things were good. I don't buy that. Some people do. And reflective nostalgia, which dwells in the aching, the longing, the loss, the imperfect process of remembrance, and the importance of stewarding what's beautiful about the past, what's remarkable about the past, not to go back to it, but to maintain it, to bring it forward with us, in the hopes that our children and our children's children will realize that they come from a lineage of people who tried really hard to get it right. Whether we did or not, I don't know. But we tried. A lot of us tried really hard. And these are markers. A couple images that feel like this is when the celestial mechanics started our way here. This is sort of like when Utsi got shot in the back. Here's a couple possibilities of how things didn't work out for her. Couldn't do this talk without an homage to the Cosmosphere and Hutch, and if you haven't been, better get on over there. Looking at real space stuff to get the patinas right, the Vostok, the Soviet space program. 2016, they're reworking the football field at Regier Stadium at Corvallis, Oregon State, and they had to stop because they found a mammoth. That happened like while I was building Celestial Mechanic. They found mammoth bones under the football stadium. Like, well, there you go. Then it makes perfect sense to put it on Wichita State campus because this is happening all over apparently. And the chainmail from Coronado's 1541 expedition that was found near Lyons, Kansas. So we can pretty accurately assume that Coronado made it all the way up near Lyons because Spanish chainmail, medieval Spanish chainmail, was found there in 1880s, and that makes perfect sense. From Spain. So there you go, and so there's a real history in Kansas too. It's not all made up of things being found from that you would not expect to find in Kansas. So here's a little painting I did for the Ulrich when they said, well, what do you want? How do you see this on the grounds? So I sent this to them, and then they got a couple professional models. Don't try this yourself, because you can see Bob, I don't know if that happened while he was modeling, or... These are stunt people, and they're trained, it's gonna happen. So they were sending me pictures like this. I'm like, yeah, that works, you know. And so Sally and Bob, thank you. Sally, wherever you are, thank you. Bob, I think you're around, thank you. I think you're still here. Really appreciate you people. And Shape of Time, George Kubler, a little bit of intellectuality thrown in here. The cultural clock runs mainly upon ruined fragments of matter recovered from refuse heaps and graveyards, from abandoned cities and buried villages. Kubler was sort of the father of this notion of material culture, which is that we tell human time by the things that people leave behind that last. And it's a lovely book, and it's a seminal book for me, and it required mention. There's the Celestial Mechanic coming up out of Mike Miller's place in Towanda. And at this point I thought, okay, this is when I first felt the piece was going to work. I really didn't have a lot of confidence when it was all shiny that it was going to do the thing. And so it's kind of before and after, right? And I really like, oh my gosh, I think this is going to work. A Derek Stenning, contemporary artist I thought worthy of mention. Derek Stenning, his website's called Born in Concrete. He's in Poland. Again, you know, just like connecting these dots. And Simon Stålenhag, a Swedish artist. how stunning is that image? Just one of the most evocative contemporary illustration images in my mind I have seen, and it's just lovely image. I think we're almost to the end, which is good, because, yeah, that's good. The one on the left, Ed Emschweiler, 1951, I just love this. You drive through Manhattan, you look through the sand, it's all been cut down, and you go, oh, there's 1 million years and 2 million years, and that Freddie's cup is like a week ago, up on top. And then you look at the Emschweiler, and you've got the human remains down there, and the adze and the blades, and then you go up, and you got a machine gun and a hand grenade, and no more human remains. Like, great image. And then this one on the right speaks for itself. Like, ooh, okay, so we're not the first. Heilbronner, The Future is History. Unlike modern man who dreams of the world he will make, pre-modern man dreamed of the world he left. This was written in 1961. This has come back around. A lot of people are thinking about the world we left. There was a time where we thought about the world we will make. We're not doing that very well these days as a culture. Some people are, some of us aren't. Some of it's for the better, because and there's a lot of mindsets about, well, let's not consume people to make up this other thing. I'm not arguing for a return to pre-modern, but I think this is an interesting quote to weigh in the present moment. That's all. It's a provocative question. Are we dreaming about the past? Are we dreaming about the future? Are we balancing the two? It's a line that I obviously tell in my work. This is my last image. I took that photo you saw, the celestial mechanic, out of Mike's place. And I was like, hey, that works. Thank you. If there's time for questions, I'll take any question, anything at all. Nothing out of bounds with me. Yes?
Yeah, Ray, so there's a story that I heard, I used to hear a long time ago. It was really impactful to me. And it was, and the picture of the drawing that Russian cosmonaut made reminded me of it. And it was that, it was about how when U.S. astronauts had gone up, they had to write upside down and things, and their pens would.
Yeah.
And so there was this, and I don't know if it's an urban myth or what, but that U.S. scientists were trying to make a pen that were upside down. And they were spending like hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars trying to make this thing. And then the story goes that the Russians were just using pencils.
Yeah. I've not only heard that story, I was given a genuine U.S. space pen as an award at some collegiate function. And they're like, it's ballpoint pen, and it writes upside down. It was invented for space. And there was a person at that event that was a Russian descent. He goes, we use pencils. It's a nice space pen. Good luck with that. Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think it's urban myth. I think that's good old pencil. Yes?
Could I possibly see your installation drawing?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And they're not called facilities. Help me. The Wichita State crew, installation crew, plants, physical plant. I don't know if any of you are here, physical plant people, anybody? It's okay. Amazing. So professional, so right, so everything top to bottom, left to right, working with the Ulrich physical plant. Change in directors, change in curators, everyone is held up their end of the bargain and then some. I just can't emphasize that more. Yes,
Was
Ruth.
the concrete, was it poured then?
Yeah, and it's,
On site.
there's no, yeah, poured on site, and it's not concrete on the bottom, it's earth all the way down.
So they really
It's very much my hope that in time, this will become more and more a possibility. Yeah. And another thing, no one's asking this, but I've still got the mic, I still got the conch, Lord of the Flies, right? Piggy's got the conch. Microphone Piggy has the conch. There's, back to the Edmund Fitzgerald, Peter Iredale. Good grief. Yeah. I would just be over the moon. Oh, that sounds so punny. Whatever. Yeah. Good grief. If tomorrow an 8-year-old kid sees Celestial Mechanic, thinks it's the coolest, and they come back at 70 years of age, and it's still there. And who can do that? A museum can do that. And the culture of a museum and the community of a museum, because that's what they do. Is they keep it alive, the thing, so you can go back, or your children can go back. And I've heard people talk about going to the Met with their parents when they were 5, and then going back and seeing that painting, and it's like getting a smell of your grandfather's cologne with wood dust and, coffee breath or whatever. You can't make that up. It has to be given to you. And to know that there's a place where you could go get that back, for me, it's still the Peter Iredale. If that happens with Celestial Mechanic, I won't be around to know it. That would be fantastic. Well, I mean, I don't assume that, but that would be awesome. And it maybe will be this instead of what it is today. Yes, sir.
Did you make the skylight?
No, that's a company in, I think, Houston, Texas, that makes hurricane-proof skylights. I watched videos on virtually indestructible. We'll see. From the outside.
With Daryl Starbird's bubble top custom cars and everything in this state, I wonder if you hadn't contracted with
I would have. That was late. That was late in the game. I was already in Oregon, and we needed a solution that was just a done deal. And I found them online, and everything looks so good. And boy, that thing's a beauty. And it's 2 layers. It has this wonderful double. Another comment that I want to bring up, because it was brought up multiple times. There are people that are telling me I can't get a good photo because of the branches and all the reflections. Like, no, that is a good photo. In the story, she falls through the branches from the sky and slams into the ground. And when we put that skylight on and all that reflectivity happened, I was just in awe. I said, I couldn't have hoped for that. Could not have hoped for that. That is the photo. You take that out, and that's not the piece suffers. It's really incredibly, there's been a lot of serendipity in the work, and that's not the least of it. Georgia.
So beside the dove on the belly,
Yeah.
the belly of the Celestial Mechanic, it looks like maybe a camera?
It's whatever
What's the
you,
function of that?
it's what, I don't know.
What was the function?
Yeah, I don't even know that. That actually found in Maine. I was given access to, there's a very old science department on the University of Maine, Orono, when I was teaching there briefly. And there was a bunch of decrepit, decommissioned scientific equipment in the basement. And they said, you can have anything off of that stuff you want. And so that aluminum rectangle, cast aluminum with the little red and green glass lenses and the guards, I don't know. Camera,
I'll let my
I don't know what it is, but hoping to find out. Yeah, but it was just a beautiful piece and needed to be there. Yeah. Yes.
Mechanic, because she was out doing a spacewalk to fix something?
And that book. I just love that book title so much. And because she's a mechanic, she was just doing her job. Yeah, she was working. She was just working, loading the UPS truck and took off. I don't know what she was doing, but she got knocked out of orbit. And I don't know where she is now, but her suit's here. Don't know what became of her. She's not there. Should I deal with the elephant in the room? Some of you know there was a human skull in the suit, a replica, museum quality replica of a human skull, Asian female human skull. And when we took her out in Towanda, that was in there. Wild. Okay, it worked, but when I started this piece, I drove to a town in Kansas, small town in Kansas, the one small town in Kansas. Memory. What's the memory? Some small town in Kansas. Cottonwood, around Cottonwood Falls. Met with Robert Hord, the state archaeologist out of Topeka. Sorry? Matfield Green, thank you. Met for coffee, and I said, here's what I want to do. And I said, I want to build this sculpture with a skeleton in it and a spacesuit, and it'll be in a shallow grave, and it'll be found. What are the issues you see as a state archaeologist? And he goes, well, this will raise a lot of questions. He goes, but they're good questions, and they're questions, he said, I face. People say, ooh, who was this person? He goes, I don't know. They don't usually come with a wallet, after a few thousand years. And so he said, do it. Because I don't see a problem. So I booked it out, got this thing done, pulled it out of Towanda. You got to see the skull to believe it. It's a model, but oh my gosh, it looks actual. And I sent him images, and he goes, hold on a minute. Wait, we need to talk. He goes, I thought when you said you were going to make a sculpture of a spacesuit with a skeleton in it, it was going to look like a sculpture of a spacesuit with a skeleton in it, not like a dead body in a spacesuit. He goes, this isn't where I didn't know this was going there. He goes, this is real. He goes, I'm looking at these images. He goes, people will, no matter what you tell them, they're going to approach this as human remains. I said, yeah. He goes, well, there's a real checkered history with human remains being viewed in Kansas. Those of you that know about the native burials in Salina that people, just decades ago, you could go look at Native American burials because they weren't ours, right? Now, these are Native Americans. We can look at their burials. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't want to go. He goes, you're going there with this piece. And then Sally Frater, in a very courageous act, called me and said, Randy, we've got to talk. She said, I know you well enough to know your intentions are to open up the canon of spacesuits to women, it was an Asian female skull that largely came out of conversations with Kylie. Like, how cool would that be? And Kylie's like, yeah, that could be me. Like, I got all the permission I needed from Kylie. Well, I did from Kylie. And Sally says, there's also a real history of white European men showing the remains of others in institutional contexts because that's interesting. She goes, is that the side of history you want to be on? Like, no. And I'm like, no. And I was really, I struggled with it, and man, she's right, and Bob's right. And then I thought, well, for Pete's sake, back to the story, he's not buried in the suit. He's taken out of the suit. The suit was just left. That's my story. The Ulrich bought me a ticket. I flew out. We took the skull out. Chris Bruner and Mike and I took the skull out. It's a good piece without it. It's a better piece without it. It's a better piece without it. So those two people saved my butt for a long time to come. They bailed me out, yeah.
Have you seen the grave site out of the Cessna aircraft?
No, I haven't.
There's a child that was buried back about 1880 or something like that, and the grave site is actually on the property, and they maintain it. It's right near one of their parking lots.
But the remains don't show, right?
No, the remains don't show.
Okay, right. Yeah, and that's where the line really got muddy. And so I don't think of this as a grave site either. The suit's found there, but I won't refer to it as a grave in my, that would require human remains for that to be a grave site. And there's no evidence of that. Think back to the Coronado chainmail. Although the figurative aspect of it begs that comparison, right? Yeah. Well, and then you've got, good grief, yeah, out in Lucas, Dinsmore, you know, which, yeah, who's buried himself so we could all see him. But he did that. That's different. He wanted that. That's different. That's very different. Tim?
How important is the celestial part of the title? Why couldn't it be a terrestrial mechanic from long ago?
Well, it's important because when I found that book just hooked me, that cover. Celestial Mechanics, it evokes, mechanics can be very vernacular and, you know, what's the term for just a daily, you know, there's nothing very exotic about being a mechanic. I'm a body mechanic, I know mechanical mechanics and all type. It's a very rigorous trade. It requires a great deal of skill and aptitude, but it's not that terribly sexy overall. Sorry if I offend mechanics, sexy mechanics out here, but celestial takes that thing, and that maybe goes back to my time as a cartoonist. When cartoons really work, in my opinion, they take, and Gary Larson was the master of this, you take a thing that we all think we know, and you shift the context where we all go, oh crap, I never thought about it that way. I thought I knew everything there was to know about this thing, but now this thing is once removed, and I'm completely out of sorts with it. And so by moving the role of a mechanic into deep space, maybe it transports the idea of a mechanic outside of our assumptions of what a mechanic is. Maybe that's why I like the title. Good question, and I'll probably have a different answer.
Well done, son-in-law, but we have to leave.
That's a perfect ending.